once in a while, it's nice to just tune out the noise, strap in, pour an ice cold glass of YouTube live stream friendly Dr. Pepper, and just enjoy being a fan of something. That's what playing through every mainline Resident Evil game in preparation of RE9 did for me. For 15 games straight, I got to turn off content creator brain and just soak in the atmosphere, laugh at some ridiculous lines, crash and hard reset at some jump scares. And of course, nerd out with chat over lore stuff. What very important picture on this film does Wesker have in his desk? And I wouldn't do this for just any series. With this one, it was best case scenario, I have fun playing one of my favorite series of all time and RE9 is a cherry on top, or worst case scenario, I have fun playing one of my favorite series of all time and RE9 is just a dead bug in the bowl. Either way, sounds like a good deal to me. So now that we're done and at viewer request, I've made a tier list. Here's some ground rules. 1, remember, this is just my opinion. I don't think I've ever seen 2 Resident Evil rankings look exactly the same. Please don't murder me. 2, nostalgia will not be a factor in this list. If something like playtime were a big factor in this, RE5 would be my #1 game, and trust me, it is not. And 3, I chose a tier list, S is best, D for worst, and I'll place each game tentatively best to the left, worst to the right within each group. But don't take the left to right order as definitively as the tiers themselves. Honestly, the order within each tier will probably change every time I think about it. Let's get into it. Going in order I played on stream, first up is Resident Evil Remake. Yeah, I know, I would have played the original first, but I didn't know I had access to them on GOG until I'd already started. You suck! It's ironic because it's a remake, but it's probably as close to the definitive Resident Evil experience any game has ever come, in my opinion. It takes all the tension, exploration, inventory management, and characters of the original story, which involves the STARS team checking out a string of murders in the Arklay Mountains, only to stumble upon the sinister negligence of Megacorp Umbrella, and just improves it. I know what's behind the door, and that still gave me shivers. Visuals, more areas, more content, more scares. The crimson heads that pop back up if you leave a dead body for too long was genius for making sure there's still tension even after you've cleared a room. This is probably the best game to use as an example for why fixed camera angles do still have a purpose, and it kinda sucks that Capcom's left them in the past completely, not even as alternate modes for their new games. They are the closest to a Hollywood movie-esque framing the series has ever gotten. It got really middling. Excuse me. The one thing I'd say that's lacking, in my opinion, is that the darker tone and gothic horror atmosphere does eliminate some of the original's cheese.
So much for him. We got to the root of the problem. Saved again.
But personally, I think this is one of the best remakes ever made, one of the best Resident Evil games ever made. It's the one I would recommend to any newcomer to play first if they're not scared off by the camera angles. If someone refuses to play with tank controls in the newer version of this game, there is a setting where you can turn them off. I don't suggest doing that, I think it breaks the difficulty balance, it's too easy to dodge stuff, but you can do it if you want to. Get juked, idiot. So for Remake, obvious S tier, not even a question, but if you can believe it, this one's actually not my favorite in the series. We'll get to that later.
Chris Redfield.
Alright.
Jill Valentine. Barry Burton. Rebecca Chambers. Albert Wesker. Resident Evil.
Next up, it's back to the very beginning with OG Resident Evil. It is a heck of a time capsule booting this thing up for the first time. Evil Dead-esque live-action intro, cast roster with a hard metal soundtrack. Yeah, you're gonna be reminded quick, this was a PS1 game. I was an infant when this game came out, so obviously I didn't play it then, but even so, I wasn't allowed to play the classics until I was much older. My parents wouldn't let me. Bashing in grunt skulls? No problem. Shooting a pixelated zombie?
Not in my house.
So this was a first time playthrough for me. Now, I mean no disrespect to the OG, but after playing Remake for so long, going back to the first kinda just felt like a regression in some ways. There's just so much that's improved on a gameplay and content level in the Remake that the main reasons I'd recommend someone play this is really just to experience where it all started. The art style that's less gothic horror and more Overlook Hotel. A game that, to me, feels less immersive, but is more challenging and arcadey, and in a good way. That doesn't sound like a zombie. Ah! Man, this is hard. You will never see me use graphical limitation as a negative for a game, and where I place other games in this tier list will be further proof of that, so don't think it's about that or something, because it's not. I see the original as a firm foundation, as a baseline for how to rank other games in the series. It's got the gameplay loop, the difficulty, the replayability that I want out of a Resident Evil game. I mean, after all, it defined it. But since I do think that formula was definitely improved in later entries, for me, I'm gonna put the OG in the B tier. And when I say improve the formula, what game am I talking about? Well, I'll tell you one game that I'm not talking about, and that is Resident Evil 0. Oh man, I'm sure I'll get flack for this, but if I could rename this one, it'd be Tedious the Video Game. The prequel story of the most annoying STARS member, Rebecca Chambers,
I'm a newcomer. I just joined the STARS Bravo team last month.
meeting up with criminal Billy Cohen right before the events of RE1 does lead to some commendable attempts to innovate, like having the ability to drop items on the ground and control two characters at the same time, but there's a reason the franchise hasn't done this since. Having to backtrack for dropped items because there's no inventory box that makes them accessible in different places is a slog. Just like having to care for two characters at once and use them separately to solve some puzzles was just more annoying than it was helpful or interesting. And on top of that, I just thought this origin story wasn't worth toughing through all that to finish. I did finish it, just didn't want to. Going this far in the weeds on Umbrella's T-Virus origin, I just didn't feel was necessary. I wasn't impressed by the anime villain that was our primary antagonist. I thought the fixed camera angles were wasted on mostly drab, boring environments with not much to show off after the opening segment. It had me in the first half or so. I was into the train and I was into the beginning of the training facility, but after that, I couldn't have been happier to just get it over with. I never want to see an army of bullet sponge monkeys ever again. And I have no doubt that replays where I know what I'm doing better would fix a lot of my issues with this game, but technically the same could be said of probably any game that frustrates you on a first go around. But I'm not judging these after playing each of them 10 times, I'm judging them how I feel about them now. And now I know one thing for sure. I will never recommend Resident Evil 0 to somebody unless I know for a fact they're already a Resident Evil fan. That's how afraid I am this game would scare them off the franchise if they accidentally played it too early. Call me harsh, but I'm putting 0 in the D tier. But it's not the worst one though, we'll get to that later. If playing 0 was a desert, the next game was a splash of cold water to the face, in a good way. Get out of the way because here comes Resident Evil 2, and what a treat it was to play this for the first time. Seriously, at the end all I did was gush over what a wonderful game it was.
It's up to us to take out Umbrella.
It's not every day a series you already love has a game you haven't played that you end up loving even more than the games you already like. Usually it's the other way around, the new stuff you play sucks. Or maybe that's just me, I don't know. The story of Umbrella's T-Virus outbreak in Raccoon City, experienced through the eyes of a little known, not really popular at all Resident Evil character, Leon S. Kennedy on his first day as a cop, and Claire Redfield, sister of Chris Redfield from the first one, looking for her brother who she's not heard from since his escape from the Spencer estate, is at its best in this version of the game. And Albert Gunner may not show up, but his presence is surely felt. 2 had absolutely everything I could ever want in a Resident Evil game times 10. It keeps up the momentum of memorable characters, but adds the surprisingly intuitive A and B campaigns that have very minimal overlap and do form a coherent timeline when you put them side by side. No repeat boss fights, there are some instances of sharing items between the characters. I mean, really, the only plot hole is you don't see each other running around the same areas, but there are cutscenes where Leon and Claire do meet up or see each other from a distance that help with that suspension of disbelief. My one single criticism I would have is that I wish it had retained more of one's scare factor. This one's got a lot more enemies and a lot more firepower, but the atmosphere, probably the best soundtrack in the franchise, and some still memorable scare moments all still hold that together enough for my liking. That's a shame he doesn't chase you into the areas. Ooh, first aid spray. We like that. So without question, RE2 Original is an S tier for me. I even liked it more than Remake, so I'm gonna put it on the left. And since Resident Evil loves their remakes, prepare to bounce back and forth just for a little bit. Resident Evil 2 Remake is often credited for the modern design of third-person horror games, popularizing the current stretch of remakes that we're on, and introducing a ton of new players to Resident Evil, being that it has sold the most units out of any game in the franchise. All things it absolutely earned. I bet the deletion of my channel she's alive.
What the
It was far from my first RE game, but before starting this stream series, I often called it my favorite one. Capcom's RE engine did wonders on translating the RPD to more modern visuals. I didn't even mind several of the rooms being darker. It added to the horror elements for me. I wish we'd have gotten that scrapped fixed camera mode, but I think Capcom still pulled off making an immersive experience with the over-the-shoulder camera on this one. Somebody did end up making a mod for that. I need to try it out. I bet I'd like it. Puzzles, backtracking, punishing inventory management, but not too punishing to where it notoriously ruins saves. We'll get to a game that does that. Mr. X being a relentless stalker enemy with echoing footsteps to ramp up the tension, updated face models and voices for Claire and Leon, with a more grounded tone this time around. I'd say this is much more of a horror game even than the original RE2 was. All good stuff. And you know, this probably would still be my favorite Resident Evil game ever if I hadn't now played the original and now I know what all they cut. Ignorance was bliss for me. I knew the campaigns were different from how it had been done before. I'd seen the complaints, but I had no idea to what extent 2 Remake recycled encounters in ways the original never did. To me, I just saw it as the same way RE1 did it, which it kinda is. But now that I've seen the way the original A and B campaigns go, and I know that they were not faithfully translated to this remake, it's sad. And I hear reports that Capcom wasn't even gonna do an A and B, this time called First and Second Run, but they ended up adding it late in development because they realized how much fans wanted it, and unfortunately it shows. It's extremely underbaked. Literally everything else about this game I love though. This and Red Dead 2 are my favorite games from that generation. I mean, I love RE2 Remake. Still not dead. I have 1 bullet left. Bring it on! But because I now see the giant omission that is the A and B campaigns, it's not a good enough remake for me to put in S tier anymore, but it's still an excellent survival horror game on its own, so I'm gonna place it here in A, a spot I think it absolutely still deserves. Still in the golden era of this stream series comes one that I was actually intimidated to play at first.
Nemesis.
Resident Evil 3 Nemesis. I say intimidated because I'd always heard how much of a brute Nemesis was, and weak. They named the game RE3 is a continuation of the Raccoon City story, this time focusing on returning Jill Valentine as she fights her way out of the city with a giant bioengineered machine of death who's basically ACAB incarnate, hunting down surviving members of the STARS team that know too much about Umbrella's dastardly deeds. What hooked me right off the bat was just how much bigger in scale it felt than RE2. RPD is still there, but you also get to explore the streets of Raccoon City. It feels more like an actual city this go around. Jill herself was an easy protagonist to root for and love, and improvements to the classic RE formula include a dodge mechanic, which I'll be honest, I could not get right for the life of me outside of luck, and a decision-making mechanic that has direct outcomes in the moment. Not just alternate endings, but they also change how entire encounters play out, areas you explore first, and so on. I really don't understand why the series dropped this. I guess it's easier to have a single canon timeline when you don't have a bunch of branching narratives.
You stupid.
But for RE3 alone, it adds so much replay value to go back, make another choice, and see how the consequences play out differently. And like RE2, the classic gameplay loop is still intact. Explore an area till you find the right item to progress, but this time the tension is less hallway jump scares, even though there are some of those. And it's more the mounting cat and mouse tension that comes from Nemesis just getting tossed into your playthrough like a frag grenade to shake things up.
No, my God!
I would struggle to call this one a horror game. It plays out more like an action game with the Resident Evil paint to me, but not to its detriment. I think it works. So well, in fact, I'm gonna put it in S tier. As to which one I like more, RE2 or RE3, is probably something I'm gonna flip-flop on for the rest of my life. But if nothing else, I'm glad this stream series introduced me to finally playing both of these games all the way through for the first time. So surely with source material this awesome, a remake should have no problem only improving on it, right? Enter Resident Evil 3 Remake, or 3Make for short, and what a baffling decision this game was for Capcom to put out. While it does boast gorgeous visuals and basically takes the already solid RE2 Remake gameplay and adds the dodge mechanic to it, I cannot for the life of me figure out why Capcom thought it would be appropriate to sacrifice the absolute best of RE3 to make this. Cut content, cut areas, cut enemy types. Even Nemesis himself is cut from an intermittent stalker enemy to one that's mostly just seen in cutscenes, in QuickTime events, and one of the dumbest boss fights in the franchise. And to just twist the knife, that dumb boss fight is repeated a second time, as if once wasn't enough. And the one section of the game where Nemesis plays like a real stalker enemy, he's way too easy to bring down. More of an inconvenience than anything. Come on by this red barrel, come on. Let's go, you ready? I'm ready. Was that all it took? There you go, have that. That's a joke, right? One grenade? Really? If 2 Remake's Mr. X is a scarier stalker enemy than 3's Nemesis, you have failed to adapt Nemesis. We're talking about the guy whose intro showed him kill a man just by picking him up, and he's now picking up Jill to inexplicably toss her down again every 5 seconds to walk towards her dramatically or aura farm in a cutscene. I have to imagine they must have really thought the multiplayer mode, Resistance, that shipped with it would be more of a hit than it was. I can't figure out why so much was removed from this game for any other reason. In fact, for the base story mode, the only people I ever see defending this cash grab are ones that self-admit they've never played the original. If you get this game on sale, which it frequently is, I think it's worth a playthrough because I will admit, the extremely short campaign is still a good $10 or $15 worth of fun, I think, but when they released this hacked and screwed version of RE3 for $60, it's not hard to imagine why people were so pissed at the time. Word on the street is modders are adding in a bunch of the cut areas, which will be interesting to see how it integrates into the base game, but Remake really isn't worthy of being a full entry. It plays more like a DLC to RE2 Remake, if anything. A lot of people don't like including replay value in their reviews, but I do consider it a factor sometimes, especially with Resident Evil, since replay value is something the series usually does have, whether that's through speed running or unlocking stuff, or just arcadey fun because you're switching up tactics on another run. And to me, that's why, although I'm sticking this in the lowest D tier, I think I'd still put it above 0. I think this one would be fun to replay on harder difficulties, unlike 0, which I never want to touch again. And speaking of hard, oh man, have you ever played Code Veronica? This one may not have a number in the title, but it is such an important game narratively that I don't really care what people say. It's a mainline entry to me. Claire Redfield, still on the hunt for Chris and following his trail across the globe, gets captured by Umbrella forces and has to find her way off a prison island where, you guessed it, a T-virus outbreak goes down, among other BOWs. And maybe a little name calling.
Cross-dressing freak!
It serves as a nice bridge between RE1 and RE5's Chris and Wesker dynamic, and I have to imagine that people that skip out on this one might get some whiplash going into RE5 considering what happened the last time they saw Wesker, and I'm not just talking about his stash. But in any case, although Claire's VA takes a break from filming the big comfy couch to return,
Do you ever roll around on the floor? Like me? Cross-dressing freak!
we also have Steve, the voice equivalent of nails on a chalkboard. His VA only did like 4 rolls, can't imagine why. And outbursts that scream every type of red flag imaginable. We're supposed to have sympathy for this kid, but I genuinely could not wait for something awful to happen to him.
Time to test out my new toy.
Dies immediately. I'll be right back, Claire. You just hear him just Good riddance. The story has more of a focus on human villains this time, and I really liked it. My big problems with this game come from the gameplay. Yes, the explore and open door while conserving items loop is here, and there are some tense moments, but this one stands out to me as by far the most difficult Resident Evil experience I've ever had, but not in the fun, difficult way. Inventory management is important here, which is good, but it's so important that even the slightest mistakes can get you soft locked, meaning if you haven't been using several save slots, you could get stuck because you don't have the right items needed to progress and can't go back to get them. Because this game is busted. 2 boss fights in a row against Mr. Cheeks here. Outrageous. There's one particular boss fight I knew that it was notorious for soft locking people. I saved up on all the ammo I possibly could, and it still wasn't enough because I missed 1 item back in the start. So I had to restart the game over again because I didn't have additional saves.
That's horrible.
Not fun. Enough of you embarrassing me in front of my friends. What's that? Somebody started the whole game over off stream? The flow from area to area in search of the right items felt more tedious than usual, and while this was the first mainline game to have true 3D environments, the trade-off apparently was less detailed environments. I think I would have preferred keeping the 2D backdrops if it meant we could have gotten more than what mostly just amounts to hallways devoid of much artistry. At least there's a great soundtrack though, seriously, it is top tier. The added dual aiming ability was a neat gimmick, but it sort of just felt like that, a gimmick. Not really all that useful outside of a couple of choice rooms if you decided to clear them. This may be sacrilege for me to say, but I honestly think this is one of the Resident Evil games that would benefit most from a remake. I want difficult RE games, but if the game is so difficult it punishes you by ruining an entire save because of one item you miss, I think that means the game is difficult for the wrong reasons. Don't let me deter you from playing it. I think all Resident Evil fans should give it a try. Just don't make the mistake I did. Make sure you use all your save slots, or prepare to possibly have your experience ruined. The soft lock aside, the thing I liked most about this game was the cutscenes, and that's not exactly the type of experience I'd hope for out of taking several hours to play a game. But it does have more pros. I said the environments were noticeably less detailed, but I did like how the camera would move with you. It made the space between you and the enemies you're avoiding feel more real. But unfortunately, at the end of the day, I just didn't have enough fun playing this one. So for me, it'll be the first we place in the C tier, with the story really being the only reason I don't put it in D. This game being so notoriously difficult on first playthroughs kinda does make me wonder if reception to it played a part in why the next game in the series turned out the way it did. This is for all the trouble you caused me in Code Veronica. And for this one, I would like to kindly remind all of you that this is just my subjective opinion, as I'm predicting this one might be a bit contentious. And that, of course, is Resident Evil 4. The Skyrim of Resident Evil with how many ports it has, when Leon S. Kennedy is sent on a mission to save the president's abducted daughter, Sandy Cheeks.
How rude!
I mean, Ashley. While RE2 Remake might have been a ton of people's intro to Resident Evil, back in 2005, for a lot of folks, that was Resident Evil 4. Opening the door wider for accessibility, RE4 ditched the horror for the most part and went all in on simulating an action movie. More enemies, more shooting, one-liners galore.
Where's everyone going? Bingo?
He said the thing. Blonde hair instead of red hair for whatever reason. The first Ganado encounter might have scared me when I was a kid, and I remember being so confused as to why there's no zombies at first, but this game doesn't try to scare you outside of a couple of encounters. It tries to entertain you, and I think it succeeds.
You entertain me.
See? He gets it. It's at the top of a lot of people's lists, and for good reason. You feel like an action hero, and it made an entire generation of people love Leon the Simp Kennedy, who is still an immensely popular character to this day.
Thanks, bro.
If you have a way to, I recommend playing this on a Wii. It was the first Resident Evil game that I ever got to put my hands on, and pointing at the screen and using the remote to swipe was an awesome experience I decree is unmatched. A lot of people think this is the first game to kind of go off the rails tonally, but I'd actually say that was Code Veronica. This one sort of just upped the ante on the stunts and ridiculousness. I mean, you get chased by a giant robot at one point, if that says anything about how far it's willing to go. Unlike a game like Silent Hill F, RE4 goes far away from the goings-on of the series so far, but still has enough connection to everything that came before to still fit nicely and cohesively in the RE timeline. It's also funny to me that a lot of people that I see say they hate tank controls, but they love RE4. I hate to break it to those people, but RE4 has tank controls.
No. No.
You can only move forward, backward, and turn. It's just not fixed camera angles this time. Although this game is so loved, it was also sort of the beginning of the end of survival horror games as we knew them. The entire genre shifting to more action-oriented experiences from this point on until the late 2010s or so. I really wouldn't even call this a horror game, to be honest with you. Call it anything but Resident Evil, and I think everyone would agree this is an action game. I loved this game a lot as a kid, but for me, it was sort of the opposite experience I had with RE2 and its remake, and I'll explain. While I love RE4's characterization of Leon, his genuinely laugh-out-loud interactions with the villains,
No more games!
see, there was no reason for Leon to do that other than just piss him off. Overall art style and soundtrack, I think I decided I don't really like replaying it as much as I do the remake. It has nothing to do with the artistry and everything to do with the gameplay. It's just hard for me to want to go back to the more restrictive run, stop, turn gameplay of the original when the remake's more fluid and open combat system just scratches that itch more for me. Again, personal taste here. This is not some objective statement over which is better. I appreciate that the game flipped headshot strats on its, well, head by sometimes punishing you with a mutation that chat pointed out to me looks clearly inspired by the Parasite manga if you pull one off, and all the boss fights and designs are still gross and awesome, but escorting Ashley is just not fun, made all the worse by Sandy Cheeks screaming in my ear every time I mess up, and tonally for me, as George Lucas says,
I may have gone too far in a few places.
Especially near the end, it devolves into sort of an explosive war sim in those last couple of chapters. If RE4 Remake didn't exist, maybe I would rank this one higher still, I don't know, but for me in my house, I'm placing RE4 in the B tier and ahead of the RE1 original, meaning I still very much like it. It's a great baseline for the action formula, I just like the way Capcom adjusted it later on more. So with all this remake talk, I guess now I have to back that up. Resident Evil 4 Remake to me is exactly how I want to see a remake improve on its technical aspects. It improves the visuals tremendously, improves the gameplay in pretty much every way by adding the parry ability, the ability to move while aiming, quick swap between weapons, and some people don't like this, but now it's not a guaranteed stun with a headshot anymore. Sometimes you have to go for two. The harder stuns and the faster enemies are a way for the game to balance out the fact that you as the player are now able to move more and better defend yourself. You can parry a torch, who knew? That hit his axe. It's a personal taste thing for me, but these remakes have gone for a more grounded tone, and personally, I like that. RE4 Remake is very much still an action game, but with a little more restraint in the silliness this time. Rule of cool, unnecessary backflips are in, but giant robots and fire-breathing dragon decor are out. The shootout stuff that I hate from the original is still there at the end, but the Gatling gun enemies have been turned into basically man-bear pigs wielding either hammers or arrow launchers, and I find that to be so much more palatable and tonally consistent with a Resident Evil game. I know a lot of people miss those levels at camp, but personally, I don't. And Ashley, our central plot point, has been updated from an anime-eyed, squirrel-voiced nuisance to an absolutely supportive queen that I actually wanted to save this time.
We work well together, don't we?
Yes.
I guess so.
Leon, buddy, get your mind out of the Ada. However, what's most lacking to me is Leon's character. Even though he does have plenty of one-liners and cracks a lot of the same ones as the original, the delivery's just a little too deadpan for me, so it doesn't hit quite the same as the original. Say it.
Hasta luego.
The villains are deprived of pretty much all their personality, and thanks to some tired voice work that includes Ada, the criminal this series really wants me to empathize with, but I never will.
Stop right there, Leon.
Wake up, you're getting paid for this.
Not a bad move.
I also don't really appreciate content like the U3 fight being removed and paywalled behind DLC, but I will say, the Separate Ways DLC is far and above a better experience than the original Separate Ways. That one sort of just served as a speed run of the main game's areas and events with shortcuts. This time, it's its own full-fledged experience, hilariously took me longer to beat than RE3 Remake's entire base game, so go figure. When throwing my hat in the contentious debate of RE4 Original versus RE4 Remake, the remake is lacking in the things I mentioned, but it's addicting, expanded gameplay loop, and added lore better connecting it to the rest of the world of Resident Evil. I'm gonna put it in A tier, right next to RE2 Remake, but because they're such different games, it's hard for me to say which one I like more. But I'm gonna guess that no game in this franchise is probably more controversial nor contentious than the next one. Fighting. There's another controversy. Whoa! That ain't nothing controversial, boys.
My name is Sheva Alama.
That's the first shot of Sheva in the entire series. Resident Evil 5, the game I by far have the most playtime in out of the entire series. I couldn't possibly even guess how many hours I have into this thing. It was the first one I myself got to own a copy of on my Xbox 360, and I combed every inch of it to get those collectibles, infinite ammos, models. I wanted to unlock everything, you know, for the achievements, of course.
Right to jail, right away.
I have a feeling Capcom wants to remake this one, but is scared to right now. No matter how they do it, someone's gonna get mad about it, so I'd bet they plan to buy their time with some other remakes first. But until then, I think the original RE5 still holds up great in its gameplay. Hey look, you can strafe now. How innovative. In an attempt to bring more visual variety to the series, this time Chris Redfield and Sheva Alomar are investigating a string of outbreaks in West Africa, where the remnants of Umbrella operating under the new company, Tricell, are testing bioweapons on unsuspecting, isolated groups of people in the hopes that their experiments will be a little less noticed this time, before going full mwahaha and spreading their terror to the rest of the world. It's funny that I have so many problems with RE5, especially the tone, the complete lack of scares, even less than RE4, the obvious influence Call of Duty had on it and other horror games at the time. The game is way too linear, the overabundance of quick-time events and rail shooter segments just make me wish I had the option to completely skip some segments of the game entirely. Can you feel the survival horror? But you know what? This game is fun. The combat formula from RE4 is back, but this time you have some increased movement capability, more variety in melee attacks, even more meaningful upgrades to your weapons galore, and again the mutations are gross and awesome. The biggest problem to me though is RE4 was much better paced. RE5 starts to get exhausting after about the swamp segment and never really slows down from there. It takes the shooting encounters that I hated in RE4 a step further and goes full Gears of War in some areas, which I hate. Please stop putting these things in Resident Evil games. I beg you. And while some of the cutscenes are a genuine joy to watch, or quickly react to, especially near the end, all this thing is just wants to destroy your controller, that's all it's here to do. Big. I can't help but feel like RE5 almost resents the series that it's in, wishing it could go even further than it does, but only stopping itself to still sort of resemble RE4 so it can still call itself Resident Evil. If you're in single player, the companion AI is kinda dumb, but I turn off friendly fire and only give it 1 or 2 weapons and healing items, so we're never fighting over resources, we're never damaging each other, it plays fine to me. This is another one I wouldn't mind getting the remake treatment if they could faithfully adapt the setting and story, but with connected areas, backtracking, and maybe combat closer to RE4 Remake, you would have a day 1 buy out of me, Capcom. Make it happen. For me, RE5 goes right here in the B tier, just after RE1 Original. It's good, but I think RE4 and especially RE4's Remake were much better attempts at this type of Resident Evil game. But isn't there one more from this era? Yes. Yes, there is. Resident Evil 6. If 5 is the most controversial in the series, 6 is the most infamous. And not just because Jake Mueller looks like the dude from Infamous. I remember when this game was coming out and the Leon Chris meetup was plastered all over the marketing. It was Avengers Endgame before Avengers Endgame was even a thing, and before Death Island was a thing. This game comprises of 4 campaigns, yes, 4, that kinda connect and kinda don't. You could honestly do away with probably 2 of them and still have a complete narrative left intact. Package a convoluted, messy narrative into a hybrid of Michael Bay movies, Vanquish-like movement, Gears of War shootouts again, and you've got yourself an over-bloated, balls-to-the-wall action game that, again, I don't understand how this got greenlit or why Capcom thought people wanted this. What in the Michael Bay is going on here, dude? Holy shaky cam. Am I having a seizure? Are you feeling it, Mr. Krabs? Are you feeling the survival horror? Remember what I said about feeling like RE5 resents the series that it's in? I think RE6 is more proof of that. Look at the level design. It doesn't resemble anything close to a Resident Evil game outside of what? Starting at point A and eventually getting to a point B? Now, RE6 is stacked as far as content goes with how many modes it has, but with its main story, it is the embodiment of quantity over quality. Repeat boss fights, repeat segments, moves at a breakneck pace for over 20 hours of campaign gameplay, far too many plot threads for one game, and one of my least favorite sins it commits, it just repeats Chris's character arc that we already saw him go through in RE5. I mean, seriously, it's straight up the same Chris story again about losing a partner and relearning the value of partnership. Like, it's the same thing.
Listen, sweetheart, you're here to pour drinks and look pretty.
Based.
So how about you shut your mouth?
there was no character growth, I guess. This game is nuts. I mean, diving, sliding, melee attacks, and I mean straight up melee attacks this time, not just finishers. This is the kind of stuff that makes for a cool mercenaries mode, but dude, we have come a long, long way from exploring rooms of a mansion while saving bullets and dodging the occasional zombie. Without it getting old. Whoa! And in another universe, maybe the revisionist history bros that are online or popped up in my stream chat, maybe they were right. Maybe this game was one of the best in the series, it's an underappreciated gem, but dude, in this world, to buy into that lunacy would require detaching it from the franchise it's in completely. Even if you make a case that the combat's fun before it burns you out a few hours in, you cannot look me in the eye and say that fighting tanks, flying jets, cover shooter gunfights, and the most obnoxious QuickTime events I have ever seen in any video game in my life make for a good Resident Evil game. This is exactly as fun as it looks. No, it's not on the rails at all. I'm just driving around. Oh my goodness. This is such a terrible Resident Evil game. This is unbelievably bad. I can't believe it. Me and chat tried to brainstorm ways that you could even remake this in a way that it would fit the Resident Evil franchise better, and I think the best we came up with was cut half the content, half the locations, trim the narrative down to remove Jake completely and demote Chris to an occasionally seen side character, make the enemies harder to kill, remove the diving and melee outside of finishers, and maybe, just maybe, you have yourself a Resident Evil game then. Which, if you remove all those things from this game, would it even be Resident Evil 6 anymore? I don't know. Don't really care because I didn't like this game at all. While I did find the gameplay itself fun for a little bit, it's just too far gone for me to ever want a game like this replicated for the franchise, so for that, I'd put it in the D tier and without question my least favorite mainline Resident Evil game ever. Thankfully, despite the initially decent looking sales, Capcom did a complete 180 with their next game. Lower budget, slimmer narrative, less characters, less locations, and most importantly to me, I need to refill my drink soon. A return to horror. Of course I'm talking about Resident Evil 7, arguably the game that saved the franchise from being shelved like Silent Hill was. After RE4 brought in a bunch of new fans, and before RE2 Remake brought in a bunch of new fans, RE7 popped into the scene to remind Capcom, the games industry, and players that there was still a place for horror games in the AAA space. I remember the first trailer getting so much positive feedback despite not giving us a ton of gameplay, because if nothing else, it said tonally, they learned their lesson from RE6 and we're ready to get serious again. Resident Evil 7 Biohazard, or Biohazard 7 Resident Evil, depending on what country you're in, is the story of everyman Ethan Winters following a lead to an isolated Louisiana home in search of his missing wife. The moment I find my wife's ID in a burn pile, I'm gone. I, like everyone else, was confused on how this was supposed to connect to Resident Evil, but setting and characters aside, it makes that clear right away. The Baker House is through and through a classic Resident Evil game, just with first person this time in an attempt for more immersion. With the story's progression and as more is revealed, it becomes more obvious how this is more tied to the Resident Evil universe, and just simply still a Resident Evil game, down to the series' most prevalent tropes and themes all the way to the climax. This is how you do a side story right, and best of all to me, it's actually scary. Jack Baker makes for a sadistic stalker enemy, like a Terminator that's obsessed with hurting himself and just saying mean things, taunting Ethan to make sure he knows just how out of his depth he is in this situation. He's pushing my foot down. Move your foot, Ethan! Get it off the pedal! If anything, I think Jack's stalker sections are too small and too short. Trust me, I'm an expert on the subject. Maybe his limited use was a test run for RE2 Remake's Mr. X, I don't know. Certainly wasn't for Remake Nemesis. Inventory management matters again, and for the first time in what, 4 games? You feel underpowered by design for many of the game's encounters. The opening is a bit long of a walk and watch cutscene simulator that dampens replays for me, but it still does a great job of establishing tone for that first playthrough, that this is what what the new Resident Evil's all about. We want to scare you again. Thank goodness. That is, until the later part of the game, where unfortunately the game design takes a nosedive. That last third or so takes you to the new area that is so uninteresting to me, so tedious to navigate. I really hate replaying it when I get there. To be fair, pretty much every Resident Evil game has at least one section that I hate replaying, but with RE7, it's the entire last third of the game. But when it comes to DLC, it does come pretty stacked with a good variety that ranges from prologue to side story to kick streamer simulator to minigame, and also some interesting epilogue stuff. We've got apparently Chris Redfield. I mean, sure, Capcom, yeah, I'll humor you and pretend that's Chris. And actually, no, that's Chet. I'm calling him Chet. You got Chet massacring dozens of enemies that were supposed to scare you in the base game.
Now that's what a pistol should sound like.
Then crazy Uncle Joe literally fist fighting them until he gets a souped up Kong glove, and it's just wacky. I guess it's mostly inoffensive to me because after all it is just side content, but none of that should take away from the fact that RE7 didn't just reinvigorate Resident Evil, it also reinvigorated AAA's interest in horror games. Turns out these games are commercially viable. It doesn't have to be an indie darling with a huge fan base of kids to make money. So when you combine my gratitude toward this game returning to the roots of what makes a Resident Evil game, along with the unfortunate slog that is its final third, I will put it in the A category right behind 4 Remake. But RE7 wasn't the last time Capcom would try to emulate what's come before. Oh no. The follow-up to this game made it very clear that Capcom wanted to keep digging up old toys from the toy box. And that is Resident Evil Village. I'm not entirely sure what possessed Capcom to go from the critical and commercial success that was RE7's survival horror and jump to a game like this. This time, Ethan is searching for his baby daughter Rose, who, for reasons frustratingly not disclosed right at the beginning of the game, is abducted by Chris Redfield. I don't have time to explain why I don't have time to explain. Yes, actually Chris this time, thank goodness, with a voice that sounds suspiciously similar to 3 Make's Carlos.
I'm not gonna die on you, leave you in a cold, cruel, Carlosless world.
Ethan, no.
Village abandons horror, again, outside of one segment of the game, and instead finds itself borrowing, to put it generously, as many elements from RE4 as it could, except this time remove the cool factor of the protagonist. Opening up with a timed crowd fight sequence? Check. Gothic horror art style? Check. Mysterious traveling merchants selling items and upgrades? Check. Working your way up to a final boss by defeating their underlings one at a time to save a girl? Check. Now, I know it sounds silly to discredit a game for copying things from a game in the same series that it's in, but I think the reason it felt so jarring for me with RE8 is because it's connected to RE7, a game that was nothing like 4, but gameplay-wise, this is just Resident Evil 4 with a weaker protagonist. It plays itself pretty straight, which normally I would like, but not when we're talking about removing the charm of RE4 that helped balance against everything happening around you. There's still plenty to like about Village, though. The castle segment was a real standout.
Like that? Harder? Don't you love me?
She's just a bunch of bugs. Don't forget, she's I can't believe it was the first area you visit. I thought for sure with how much they marketed Lady Dimitrescu, she'd be a later boss. They knew what they were doing. The baby segment may not be that fun to replay, but the first time experiencing it was horrifying in all the right ways. If you know, you know. And I do love the fights with the Lycans. They're much more aggressive than the Ganados of RE4. They often sprint right up to your face and can easily crowd you if you're not being careful. They're animalistic. They're just creepy all around. But this time, no cool mutations to change up how you have to handle each encounter. You can basically just pick a single strat and use that throughout the whole game. And I'll go ahead and admit to all of you, the first time I played RE Village, I quit. Stopped playing it halfway through. I realized it had crossed the line from homage and was becoming just full-on imitation, and I just wasn't into it. And even with a serious tone like RE4 Remake had, too many of Village's visuals and ideas were just too silly for my taste. The over-the-top villains just didn't do it for me. I don't care about some annoying dancing puppet and yet another anime villain, but this time a knockoff Magneto for some reason. The knockoff of the host monster was cool though, didn't mind that. But then Capcom released the third-person mode, which, while I don't appreciate appreciate that being paywalled at the time, it did get me to give the game another shot, and this time I finished it. I don't know, something about the third person just feels way more Resident Evil to me. Only problem is this game was clearly not designed for third person, and anytime you go to an interior area, which is like half the game, the camera becomes way too crowded for my liking. There were some places in the game that were designed to make you feel claustrophobic when you're in first person, but when you're in third person, you can see it's just kind of crowding around Ethan's head, and it's a little distracting. It did make outside group fights way more manageable though, you got more room to see, so I'll give you that. And then it, the game gives us a tank fight and a Chris segment near the end of the game, which 5 years later still don't understand why it's there. I know I've said the series was too inspired by COD in the past, but genuinely, this entire segment is Call of Duty with werewolves. It was fun, I won't lie to you. I would be interested to see a game like this where you're blasting monsters in first person, but just not in a mainline Resident Evil game, you know? It felt so tonally out of place. And there's a plot twist near the end that if you really want to scrutinize it, it doesn't hold up in some ways, but I thought it was interesting. Honestly, saved the narrative for me. I really didn't care about anything else that was going on. DLC was fine. It takes place so far in the future, even RE9 isn't there yet, so I'm curious if they'll ever have the Winter Saga cross paths with other characters, or if 7 and 8 truly are just an isolated story that's over now. So all that said, I do not think Village is a bad game, but if you want to copy a previous game in the series, you gotta make yours stand out or improve on it somehow, and I don't feel like Village did that, at least not well. If I'd never played 4 before, I probably would have enjoyed it more, but I have, so I don't. So for that, I place Village in the C category. Not terrible, but below my baseline of where I'd want a Resident Evil game to be. Which brings us to the final and most recent Resident Evil game to date by the posting of this video. Resident Evil Requiem, a game that absolutely terrified me at its first reveal. Not because the trailer was scary, but because it terrified me with all this talk of pleasing both the horror fans and action fans, all the first person and third person fans. I was 100% certain, as with any time a game tries to please everyone, it ends up pleasing no one. It'd be too far balanced toward one type of gameplay, and the other would feel like it was thrown in as an afterthought or something. Maybe the Porsche and watch sponsorships would be too distracting, I don't know. There it is. There's our custom Porsche Cayenne Turbo GT. Does this make you guys want to buy it? The nostalgia bait would be too much. It'd be 10 hours of just soulless references for brownie points. But I still went into it open-minded and cautiously optimistic, and lo and behold, our hope was rewarded. Mostly. All I wanted was to be a Resident Evil fan playing a new Resident Evil game, no over monetization, no agendas thrown in my face, just a gamer playing a game. And I feel like I got that. Sure, some stuff is stupidly paywalled that shouldn't be, but the stench of modern AAA gaming didn't show itself yet for the most part. Grace is an excellent addition to the roster. It was refreshing to have a character who's genuinely scared of what's happening around them, but still capable enough to get through it. And her VA was incredible, dude. Seriously, give this lady an award or something. Some of the best voice work I've ever heard in any game, let alone a Resident Evil one. Can I say phenomenal voice acting by whoever plays Grace? That's in a different galaxy than RE4 Remake Ada. I know the bar is not incredibly high, but my goodness. And to those that say Grace isn't attractive enough to be in a Resident Evil game, shut up. Just shut up. Don't even act like if this girl walked into your room right now with a steak, baked potato, and cold beer on a tray and said, "Are you winning, babe?" you wouldn't feel like you won the game of life. And I'm sorry to start on this non-issue, but it's a forced controversy that's acting as a barrier of entry for some people, and I want to shut it down. Longtime viewers know I'm all for calling out AAA gaslighting when it comes to character looks when that actually happens, but this ain't one of those times. Beauty's in the eye of the beholder, sure, but saying that people should boycott this game because Grace isn't attractive enough for a Resident Evil game is nothing more than a self-report that overextended sessions of jiggle physics blender animations has broken their brains when it comes to perception. Resident Evil games are full of beautiful people, and Grace is no exception. Not attractive enough. Get out of here. Alright, moving on. The entire first half of this game I thought was exceptional. A perfect classic Resident Evil gameplay loop in the clinic, intercut with some Leon action sequences for the action fans, good pacing all around, good scares, satisfying combat. I was ready to give this game a 9 out of 10. My only criticism was that I wish the base mode were harder. I felt like standard was too easy even with the ink ribbons. Other than that, I was in love with this game. And then we get to the second half and the cracks start to show. Now, I see a lot of people saying they didn't like Leon's big section, but I liked it. It felt like RE4 Remake again, but with more finishers to pull off. There were some ridiculous moments. I didn't feel like they ventured too far into RE6 territory, except maybe once when you're put in an arena with a particular type of enemy that I really hate and wish they would stop putting in Resident Evil games. But mercifully, even that didn't outstay its welcome. I was still into everything going on. Like the first half, I wish it had been harder, maybe with a higher enemy count in the Leon sections, but yeah, I was still having a good time. And then the nostalgia bait just became too much. Remember what I said about Village and when paying homage leans too far into imitation? RE9 does that again, but way worse this time. To avoid spoilers, I'll just say some of it was so obviously asset flips from the remakes, it just took me out of it. If the remakes didn't exist, I bet those moments would have been awesome, but they do. So I was like, dang, did you guys run out of money or something? Like, what's going on here? I understand that this game had the gargantuan task of capturing the interest of both old and new fans, but when you're nostalgia baiting stuff from games that have been apparently scrubbed from this new Resident Evil timeline we're in, it's just weird. It comes off as nonsensical. Like, if the remakes, not the originals, are canon to RE9, why would RE9 play a soundtrack from the original that wasn't even in its remake to try to make you feel something? Or if it was in the remake, it was paywall behind DLC, but that's not the point. Or why would RE9 have one returning character who's based on a non-remake version, while another returning character is sort of like a hybrid between the remake version and the original timeline? New players will never know the difference, but this game was clearly made with fans in mind, so I'd like to think I'm not the only one that got canonical whiplash throughout my playthrough. It's just weird. It doesn't make sense, man. And here's the thing. I was willing to forgive that. I was willing to forgive the retreaded stuff if they just stuck the landing at the end of the game. I've never gone into a Resident Evil game looking for some deep narrative. Usually I think they excel when the stories are simple as long as they nail the atmosphere and characters, but this time the premise was actually intriguing. I wanted to see where it went. I didn't care that it was kind of just a plot device to get Leon back to Raccoon City, but the best thing I can compare the end of this game to is The Last Jedi, when you have a huge buildup to sort of a it doesn't really matter kind of message being the big payoff. That and some of the retcons were annoying. I go into that more on stream if you want to see the spoilers. And the narrative just falls apart at the end. I won't say which to avoid spoilers, but the final boss is a repeat boss fight from another game, one of several enemy types that come off as asset flips, and worse than that, it was just too easy. Such a shame. But otherwise, gameplay-wise, I think RE9 never faltered. There was never a moment playing RE9 where I said to myself, I'm not having fun now. This isn't fun. That never happened. And while there are some parts that I'm not really looking forward to replaying, those parts are really short and few and far between. I had a blast playing Grace's horror segments. Get up, Grace! Turn around, Grace! I had a blast playing Leon's action segments, like riding a bike. If you go into it knowing full well that narratively it just kind of deflates like a balloon at the end, and you just go in to enjoy the gameplay, with that view, I think it's a great game. Good enough to go in the A tier, but I would not put it above 2 and 4's remakes right now. To its credit, and also to its detriment, RE9 was absolutely a Resident Evil game for Resident Evil fans. I do look forward to replaying it on harder difficulty, that's for sure. And give us Mercenaries, Capcom, what are you doing? So that's it. What's your Resident Evil game tier list? Remember, it's just opinions we're sharing here, so no need to get heated in the comments. It's not like this is a marathon video or anything, right? Thank you, channel members and patrons. As always, thank you all for watching. Carry on, you kings.